country as an Army Reserve veteran, and he just spent nearly 3 years incarcerated for a non-violent offense on January 6th. He entered the Capitol and was charged with a felony of obstruction of an official proceeding. Now, my understanding is some of the stuff is now being reviewed by the Supreme Court of the United States. But not only did he spend 3 years in the D.C. jail, he spent, for 1 year, he spent 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Tim Hale, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
So, Tim, I believe that all of the people that were there that day should have gotten a slap on the wrist. I think the people that did tussle with the cops or fight should have gotten more than that. But I do believe that most people should have got a slap on the wrist, not several years in jail. Nor do I understand how they could force you into solitary confinement. Normally, that means you would be a threat to others. How did they ever justify putting you into solitary confinement, let alone jail for nearly 3 years?
Well, first, sir, let me say I do agree for the most part with what you said about the slap on the wrist thing. If the 14th Amendment has any real purpose, it's equal protection. And obviously we see that that's just not been the case these past few years. Some people who did commit assaults, they should be held accountable. I do think that, unfortunately, the story most people don't hear is that there was entrapment and there was incitement. But with regard to the solitary confinement, sir, the tragic story is, and take this with a grain of salt, but the guards in the D.C. jail admitted they cleared the cells out for us weeks before January 6th. So initially I believe it was part of that shock and awe thing that the DOJ was rolling out to punish Trump supporters. You also need to remember COVID-19 was still kind of a thing, quote unquote. So the DC jail was able to do pretty much anything it wanted, regardless of civil rights. So it was a punitive measure, but they had some sort of legal cover. The conditions did improve over time, so it wasn't always 23-1. But, you still could not see your lawyer. You could not have religious services. You did not have access to much of your discovery or your evidence. And this was all to punish people. It was spiritual warfare because people were watching their families be destroyed. It was a way to crush people into taking plea deals to avoid having to meet the burden of evidence in trial for the government. But there's a lot to it. And part of it is the entrapment. Part of it is to bury the story. Certain defendants, like me, had evidence on our phones that showed that the crowd was mostly peaceful until they were attacked. This is obviously something they didn't want getting out because it destroyed the insurrection narrative. So there's a lot to your question. I could honestly, we could talk about this for hours. But just know that the narratives you've heard about January 6th for 3 years have been lies. And they kept a lot of people locked up so you wouldn't find out.
Well, we did have a local guy here that was there, and one of the things he told us is this. That is that the crowd coming over was pushing against the barricade, but that was all. It was pushing against the barricade. But then the cops started launching tear gas and other things. And because they couldn't retreat because of the crowd behind them, they had no choice but to go forward. Plus, some of them got angry. Why are you firing on us? We're just standing here.
Well, that's exactly right. And again, this is something, after I got out, I created a Twitter. I'm actually putting video out. I think I'm putting out more video than Speaker Johnson has at this point. And that's exactly right. Unfortunately, a lot of people were entrapped. You can call it whatever you want, a honeypot, a lobster trap. But there were points where if you were in a certain location and the cops attacked you, you couldn't go back. And so that's actually how I ended up going through the scaffolding up to the Capitol building. I have video now that they withheld for trial that showed me trying to leave. But this, unfortunately, is something people aren't really getting the full story about. Yeah, there were people, unfortunately, who knocked barriers down around the restricted area that apparently existed. Most people didn't know that. And this was a half hour before I even showed up to the Capitol. So when people come from the Trump speech, they have no idea this happened. And so people who are waving thin blue line flags end up getting into a squabble with the Capitol Police. And I don't blame the Capitol Police entirely. I just think they were unprepared. There were bad elements within the Capitol Police, just like the crowd. Keep in mind, there were agitators in the crowd too. That incited the police, and that gave the police cover to use excessive force. It was the perfect storm for a planned riot that you wouldn't immediately assume was planned.
And let me ask you this. While you were in that D.C. jail for nearly 3 years, did you run into anybody from Antifa that, firebombed court buildings, shot at cops, firebombed cop cars, rampaged and looted and burned buildings? Did you run into anybody from there that did rioting, pillaging, and all the rest?
Well, it's funny you say that. Not quite those things, but there were Antifa in the D.C. jail that were planted there by the DOJ to basically inform on people. So there were people who weren't real Trump supporters who were in the jail with us. Several of them were snitching on me for years so they could sabotage my trial. And things they were doing were actually mentioned in my sentencing hearing. So there are unfortunately, and this is a little down the rabbit hole, but the deep state, if you want to call it that, they do this sort of thing. Whether it's Operation Mockingbird, whether it's COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program of the FBI, they plant people so that they can use them to control the narrative from both sides. So if you go to look for interviews with January 6th defendants, you'll find a lot, but you'll see the same names over and over again for the past 3 years. Now you got to ask yourself, if you're from the DC jail, if we are in solitary confinement, if that's true, how are some of these people doing interviews and live streaming for 3 years straight? That makes no sense. So we have to be very careful because they want to infiltrate the MAGA movement.
Because you have successfully served your sentence, are you on any kind of probation? Like, could they come after you for saying this, that, and the other?
No, I don't believe so. As long as I'm not threatening anybody or anything like that, I'm not inciting anything, no, I shouldn't. I am on probation, but I mean, I'm literally just speaking, Unfortunately, people have had to serve sentences at this point, or they'll have to serve their sentence fulfill their sentence within the immediate future for the truth to get out about them. A lot of us have suffered from frame jobs. We were turned over by friends or relatives or coworkers, and the feds made up their narratives about us after the fact. And this is a dangerous precedent for the United States because now informing on people is considered a virtue rather than disgraceful. And so it's unfortunate, but this is what they call lawfare now. It's a popular term now, warfare by law, where the country's so divided politically, it's so partisan now. You can't even be sure you can talk to people without being at risk of being turned into the feds. This is a dangerous precedent. I mean, even the charges we got, sir, like the 18 USC 1512 you mentioned, the obstruction of an official proceeding, that was used against us, but that was really just a Trojan horse to use against President Trump. And what's just funny is, like you mentioned, Antifa in the jail. As a matter of fact, some of the informants in the D.C. jail got too comfortable, and they admitted that they were actually at the Capitol to get out of trouble, not in trouble. They were caught with drug conspiracies in 2020, and so, unfortunately, I mean, I'm glad for the opportunity to speak. It's a real shame it's taken 3 years for the truth to get out. Bits and pieces here and there have gotten out, but it's just not been enough.
We have a local couple that just got indicted a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things they were doing is they were checking cell phone records, flight records, hotel reservations, and like that to track people there that day. And then secondly, they monitored, I think they spied on this lady in her house, and then also, though, she actually was talking about it publicly here and there. So I'm wondering if they're going to throw the book at her. She didn't go in there very long. She was only in there 10 or 15 minutes. But nonetheless, so we're kind of wondering what's going to happen to her. Let's take a break.
Sure.
Our guest is Hale. We're going to be back with more. Again, he just spent nearly 3 years incarcerated for non-violent offenses on January 6th. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Andy Caldwell Show. It is an essential and fundamental right, the right to own and use private property. Third property rights are constantly under siege. From powerful government agencies like the EPA, the Fish and Wildlife Service, or even the California Coastal Commission on the property rights of our citizens, Pacific Legal Foundation attorneys go to battle to defend them free of charge. PLF attorneys are no slouch. 40 years, they've racked up scores of victories in courtrooms across the country and have an unmatched record of wins at the U.S. Supreme Court. PLF gets its power to rein in overreaching government from people like you and me, citizens who still believe our Constitution is the bedrock of our basic freedoms. Support PLF's fine property rights work today with a tax-deductible gift. Go to pacificlegal.org. That's pacificlegal.org. Sunset Auto Center in Lompoc, 1300 North 8th Street, Lompoc. Welcome you to discover new opportunities with the new Chevy. To meet up in a Chevy Equinox, where the J.D. Powell Award for Initial Quality among compact SUVs 2 years left, or lend a hand in the strong and capable Chevy Silverado, or finally mix it up in a high-tech Chevy Trax with an available 11-inch diagonal touch screen. With so many choices, we'll find plenty ways to come together this year. Sunset Auto Center, 1300 North 8th Street. And you can get 1.9% financing on all 2024 Silverado models, or get 2750 cash allowance on LTZ and high country models. You must finance with GM Financial. Some customers may not qualify. Not available with lease and some other offers. Take new delivery by 1/31/24. And while you're at Sunset Auto Center, congratulate Cheryl Bedford for 41 years with Chevrolet.
Looking to relax and rejuvenate? Look no further than the Spa Dolphin Bay's membership program. As a member, you'll receive 60 minutes Swedish massage or signature facial every month, plus discounted rates on additional services. You'll also receive exclusive access to their facilities, including an infrared sauna, resort infinity pool, and relaxation patio. At Dolphin Bay, you'll indulge in the ultimate relaxation experience just minutes from home. All of this is available for just $120 per month. Call 805-773-5003 to learn more. Caution about Advantage plans. If a caller or salesperson attempts to entice you into an Advantage plan, saying you're paying too much for your supplements, be sure you know all the answers before you get locked into one. Did I keep my doctor? Can I choose my specialist? And do I need a referral? What is my out-of-pocket if I get really sick? Can I still use my Medicare if I want? Is my Advantage plan good anywhere? How do I find providers in my network? Do I have to get pre-authorization to have a procedure? Remember, original Medicare does not have a network. Medicare is federal, so your supplement goes with your Medicare. And your supplement probably has a $50,000 travel benefit. This is Billy Joe Crivello. I can help you. Call me at 805-928-7372. That's 928-7372.
Sometimes the stars simply align in your favor, almost as if the universe is beckoning you to enjoy a moment for yourself. A moment of freedom from the norm, an escape to the unexpected, where you and only you decide what constitutes a win. Welcome to Shumash Casino Resort. Welcome to freedom. Always game responsibly. Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 years of age or older.
Looking out for labor, agriculture, and business each and every day. It's the Andy Caldwell Show, brought to you by Cola.
I'd like to welcome you back to the show. My guest, Jim Hale. He served our country as an Army Reserve veteran, and he just spent nearly 3 years incarcerated for non-violent offenses on January 6th. and he's telling his story, and it's a story that needs to be heard. Tim, one of the things we talked about is the entrapment, the incitement, and the agitators. One of the ways we were talking about this in real time when this happened, that I believe that some of this was false flags / provocateurs, i.e., one congressman believes there were a couple of hundred undercover FBI agents and or people retained by the agency. And one of the things they wanted to do is they actually wanted to create a crisis. Manufactured crises is what the Clintons used to talk about. Manufactured crises. Have people that have gotten out of jail and or, got probation been able to help piece together the narrative of who were those provocateurs and running this show?
Well, it's multifaceted. I would agree with the term false flag. I actually prefer to use the term color revolution, because it was very similar to me to what we do in Eastern Europe or the Near East. Unfortunately, when you get out, if you are on probation, if you got a felony, you can't associate with felons. So it's not easy to communicate with other defendants. But there is a lot of evidence that's out now. You have someone who hasn't gone to trial yet. His name is Will Pope. You can find him on Twitter at Free State Will. He actually does a lot of good research, and he's actually exposed quite a bit of, let's just say deep state handiwork. There were Antifa there. There were undercover officers there in the crowd. When I was still in jail, what little discovery we had, we absolutely found undercover, assets. You want to call them G-men, whatever the case may be. Yeah, there were feds. There were assets in the senses of like people who were recruited. There were informants, and there were Antifa. Was this everybody? No. And at the end of the day, people are technically responsible for their own actions, but a lot of people behaved in ways that were just totally beyond the pale for how they'd normally behave. And that's entrapment. Entrapment is when a crime is conceived in, the law enforcement's mind and not in the person who actually engages in it. I was telling you before that 2 defendants in the DC jail that were with us, one of them confessed that his co-defendant was caught in a drug conspiracy in 2020. So they were turned out basically by the DOJ to go to the Capitol in costumes and to get people in trouble and to record themselves doing it. It's just a reality. This is and they have names. These are unfortunately actual defendants, and they you have people on They have people on one side who just want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt and think, well, look, they're being politically persecuted. That's true, but you have to understand not every defendant is really who they say they are. And then on the other hand, you just have the insurrection narrative. So this is like a Hegelian dialectic. This is a controlled narrative. There are a lot of people connected to January 6th who are very shady. And unfortunately, for 3 years, a lot of people who've monopolized interviews and stuff like that have actually been extremely suspicious. The first man I met on Con Air, a January 6th defendant, was an informant. And he's been doing interviews for 3 years from solitary. Like, how does that happen? And so a lot of people, fortunately, didn't go to the DC jail. Some people pled out early. They got misdemeanors or they got light sentences. But I would venture a guess the average January 6th defendant, because we are a fair cross-section of American society, I think most of them just wanted to return to their lives. I don't think most January 6th defendants go digging into it. And frankly, because a lot of people did take pleas or, to just get it behind them, I don't think most of them even got the evidence that would be needed to dig into this in the first place. That's why that's why I went to trial, because they did not want to give me my evidence at all. Forget them burying a lot of evidence that was used to defame me as a far right extremist. They did that to deny me bond so that I would go to the DC jail, so that I couldn't get my evidence, so that I couldn't be prepared for trial, so that I would be convicted. But even on top of that, you just don't have a lot of the evidence.
I don't understand how they were not able to. You were not able to get evidence. You were not allowed lawyer visits. I don't understand how they suspended normal rights of due process and got away with it.
I mean, they are still getting away with it, unfortunately. And I'm an independent. I'm not a partisan person. I just support Trump. So, I mean, I don't want to, make political attacks here, but I'm very disappointed in Speaker Johnson. It doesn't seem, maybe he'll prove me wrong, but he's supposed to be releasing this video. And they're blurring faces of people in the crowd. And it's like the sedition hunters, that's not going to stop them. They're going to keep finding people anyway. All that really does is protect federal informants in the crowd. I mean, it seems to me like both parties and all three branches have been working together to get rid of President Trump. And we're all just pawns, and we're just stuck in the crossfire. Like I said, that 15 U.S. The reason I brought up those informants that I met in the jail is that those are the first defendants who had the 18 U.S.C. 1512 upheld in the district court. So that obstruction of an official proceeding charge was first upheld in court by district judges for informants, which is the same charge being used not just against January 6 defendants, but against President Trump. That's why the Supreme Court hearing that's coming up is so important. But, I mean, you could just see the collusion between the branches and the parties for years now. This has all been about getting rid of Trump. And my greatest regret is not that I lost 3 years of my life. It's that I was used as a weapon against President Trump. And I wish I had a bullhorn that I could just, tell the whole country at once. But, I mean, I appreciate this opportunity to speak, but people really need to realize these people are malicious. Some of them are dumb, but they're malicious. They planned this out in advance by a lot, and it's all to get President Trump.
All right, one last question before we run out of time.
Absolutely.
Ashley Babbitt's family is sued. Do you think more truth will come out on that?
I'm not going to... I'll say this. I would like to think so. Unfortunately, and this is just my experience, is that the courts have worked consistently to promote the insurrection narrative and to deny defendants or anybody associated with January 6th of due process and their rights. And they've done everything they could to bury the truth. And I honestly, just thinking about how the system, again, nonpartisan, just thinking about how the system works. When riots happened before January 6th with Black Lives Matter, there were lawsuits there too. People sought damages for that, and I don't think that went anywhere. I could be wrong. So I hope so, because Ashley Babbitt, or whether it was Roseanne Boylan, or whether it was the other protesters who got killed that day, they keep repeating that it was a violent insurrection, it was a deadly insurrection. The cops weren't the ones who died that day. It was protesters. And whether it's the country deserves the truth. The families deserve the truth. I'm grateful Patriot Freedom Project was there to help the guys in the DC jail. But, and people should support Patriot Freedom Project. But, you have a lot of people, unfortunately, who were impacted in other ways. The people who are suffering on house arrest, people who are suffering on house arrest, people who commit suicide. There are a lot of people who've been impacted by this. I mean, Matt Perna committed suicide.
All right.
Rachel Powell,
All right. The time that thank you for being with us, and I'm very sorry this happened to you and the others. Again, some people deserve to be punished. Most of them didn't, in my opinion. Tim Hale, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. God bless you.